My name is Alfredo. I'm a program manager on the Azure Stack team, and joining me is a partner whose microphone is off right now, I believe. Also a program manager on the Azure Stack team. So let's get going. We are going to talk about Azure Stack usage and billing today. In particular, how Azure Stack usage is processed. You've probably already heard that you will pay for Azure Stack through Azure subscriptions. So we'll look at how that happens. In particular, how it happens for enterprise customers and how it happens for service providers, because the mechanics are slightly different. And we'll look in particular at how you configure it. And then we'll take a look at what's a frequently asked question: how do I integrate that Azure Stack usage reporting with my billing system, with my cost accounting and cost analysis systems, and so on. We are not going to talk very much about the Azure licensing model per se. There was a session yesterday, session number 2093, which has been recorded. So if you want more depth about that, please go watch that session. But I'll say a couple of things about Azure licensing so that we are all level set and we know what we are talking about. There are two Azure Stack licensing models. One is consumption-based, one is capacity-based. The consumption-based, also called pay-as-you-use, is the one that is consistent with the Azure model. It's the one in which you have the software pre-installed by the hardware partner on your system. You do not pay anything up front when the software is installed. You pay over time in proportion to your usage. In this model, EA and CSP subscriptions are supported. Capacity is the model that resembles more traditional software licensing. You count the physical core in your Azure Stack. You buy a capacity license upfront in proportion to the physical cores, and after that you do not need to report usage. You have essentially unlimited usage for the duration of the capacity license, which is annual. This is only available to enterprise customers, not in the CSP channel. So today we will really focus on the consumption model of these two. The consumption model, obviously, is the one that requires you to report the amount of consumption that you do, and so that's what we want to focus on. We'll not talk so much about capacity, but please be aware that even a system that is licensed as capacity can collect usage data, and so if you want to use that usage data for your cost analytics, for your internal billing, you can do so even when you use capacity. Good. So let's start with an overview of usage reporting and how it works. This is really the core diagram. So take a good look at it, and you'll probably need to refer back to it in the future. Usage data originates on Azure Stack. So what you see on the slide within the box at the bottom, the dark outlined box, that represents what happens on Azure Stack. And then what happens later in Azure is the cloud at the top. So in Azure Stack, you have a number of resource providers, right? Resource providers are just pieces of software that abstract physical resources and make them usable through the Azure portal, through the Azure Stack portal, and through the other Azure Stack tools. So each resource provider, at least once every hour, will emit a usage record and send it to the usage service. What does the usage record say? The usage record says that this resource was consumed. Here is how much of it was consumed. So for example, there was a VM. The name of the VM was Alfredo VM1. Over the course of the last hour, it ran for 30 minutes. And it was used by a subscription, which has a subscription GUID, and so the usage information is tagged with the GUID of the subscription that is associated with it. This information is sent to the usage service. The usage service stores this information in a local database on Azure Stack called UsageDB. And in UsageDB, it can be accessed directly by the Azure Stack administrator, but it's also accessed by another service that runs in Azure Stack, which is called UsageBridge. UsageBridge wakes up about once per hour or a little bit more often, connects to public Azure, in particular to a service that we have placed in public Azure, which is called Usage Gateway, and sends the most recent usage information. Any usage information that has not been sent yet is sent up by UsageBridge to Usage Gateway. Usage Gateway prepares this information for submission to Azure Commerce and submits it into Commerce. And this is an interesting trick that we are doing here. So by having Usage Gateway submit your usage information to Commerce, we are really making it possible to take information that comes from outside of Azure, so from services that run in your data center, but Azure Commerce will process it as if the usage had happened in Azure. So in the output from Commerce, what you see in the billing portal, what you see in your billing reports, what you see from, through the usage APIs, Azure Stack usage is going to look exactly like Azure usage. It's only distinguished by two things. It has a region, which is not one of the usual Azure regions like US West or US East. It is a region that is specific to Azure Stack and is called Azure Stack, so it's easy to recognize. And Azure Stack has a set of meters that are different from the services that run in public Azure. So when you look at the Azure Stack usage information in your billing portal, if you run VMs in public Azure and in Azure Stack, you see them in two different categories of usage because it's two different meters. Okay, so this is the process that the data goes through. Now, what I would like to do is talk a little bit more about what Usage Gateway does exactly in order to prepare the usage information created on Azure Stack for submission to Commerce. Usage Gateway essentially does three classes of operations. It takes the local subscription that had been used to tag the usage information in Azure Stack. Now, that local subscription is specific to Azure Stack. It's not a public Azure subscription. It would not be understood by Azure Commerce. So what the Usage Gateway does is map all the local subscriptions to Azure subscriptions. And we'll talk more about exactly how this happens later in the presentation. The meter IDs are different in Azure Stack and in Commerce. And in fact, not all meters that are produced in Azure Stack are billed for. We'll come back to this in a minute with details. But so there is some processing of the meters themselves. And there may be a need to adjust the timestamp that is associated with the usage. What does this mean? Well, there could have been a delay in the transmission. Think, for example, about the case of a network outage. What happens in the case of a network outage is that usage is batched up on Azure Stack. It's not lost. It is stored locally until a time when the connection becomes possible. And at that point, all the usage that has not been uploaded yet is uploaded. Now, what happens is that we have, in that case, usage dates that can be quite old, and the Commerce system would reject them. And so what we do is we change the timestamp to the timestamp of the time that Usage Gateway processes the data. So the current time at that point, it goes into Commerce. Commerce takes it as recent, and everything flows smoothly. Now, all this information that we modify, we do not throw the original values away. The original values are stored in the additional fields of the usage records that we submit to Commerce. So what this means is that when you see your billing reports or you query Azure using the usage APIs, you will find that information. So for example, all the information about the local subscriptions, which can be very useful in an internal billing situation, is still there and shows up in the finished usage reports, and you can use it. And likewise, the timestamp, which sometimes is useful in resolving billing discrepancies. So I've talked about the fact that meters, that there are more meters available on Azure Stack than you are billed for. So the Azure Stack resource providers generate about, at the present time, 15, 20 meters for different types of events. Of these, we only charge you for 6, which are the ones that are highlighted in yellow on this slide and on the next. So the first thing to be aware of is, I do not expect you to read all of these slides, but you know that the slides are going to be available for download, and so you can have these for reference. This is also published in the Azure Stack documentation. If you search for usage APIs, you will find a page that has this complete list, and we keep it updated. So best thing is to see it there. But the most important idea here is there is more information available on Azure Stack than what you get billed for, and some of that information may be interesting to some of you for your internal billing, or if you're service providers for the billing of your end customers. In particular, a meter I would like to call out from that point of view is this one called VM size hours. Now, the billing that we do for Azure Stack VMs is based on virtual cores. The unit of charge is virtual core per hour. But I have talked to service providers who told me, well, I would actually be interested in charging my customers for the amount of RAM that they use as well, and where can I find that information? And the answer is you find it through this VM size meter. That meter is reported in virtual machines. It's not normalized to vCores, so if you have a machine with 4 virtual cores that run for an hour, it reports 1 unit of consumption. And in the additional field, you read that the VM was a D4 VM which had 4 cores. A D4 VM is always going to have a certain predefined amount of RAM, so you can go from there and determine how much RAM the customer has consumed for you. So this is an example of how a local meter might be used. Another one is key vault transactions. If anybody decides to charge for them, Microsoft doesn't, but a service provider might want to. Another piece of information that I'm inserting in the slide for reference, don't rush to make copies of this, it's all going to be available. This is the list of the meters that we actually charge for. So in your commerce output, these are the meter GUIDs that you can go looking for. Now, I told you we had 6 units that we charged for. You see that there are a few more things here. And what's important to call out is you see that in the name of some of these meters, there is the word admin, right? It appears in a number of places. These meters that are called admin are $0 meters. So we do not charge you any money for them. They are there for reference, for information. They represent virtual machines that run in the admin space of Azure Stack. So virtual machines or other workloads that run in the admin space as opposed to the user space. Typical example of a VM that runs in the admin space is a resource provider. SQL Server resource provider, app service resource providers have a few VMs that they spin up in the admin workspace. On the other hand, if a lot of normal standard VMs with SQL databases start showing up under admin, you will probably get a call from your Microsoft rep who says, hey, it looks like user workloads that you should be paying for are being run under the admin subscription, and that is not okay by our licensing. So be mindful in general to have a good separation between what are user workloads and what you run in the admin subscription, the so-called default provider subscription. It's good for security, and it's also good for your compliance with licensing. Okay, so I've referred a couple of times to the fact that usage needs to be set up, usage reporting needs to be set up, it needs to be configured. How do you do it? It is done through a step which is called registration. And registration is a step that happens at the end of the deployment process. So if you are purchasing a multi-node system, you're going to purchase it from one of our hardware partners. They will do the deployment for you. They will also do the registration for you. They will ask you for a subscription to use, and in fact, we'll look at exactly how they do it in a minute, but they will do it for you. So it's good for you to be aware that this is going to happen. You don't need to concern yourself too much with how to make it happen. The key point, however, is it is a step that needs to happen, because if you have a multi-node system that is licensed in the consumption model, the pay-as-you-use model, it is mandatory that you report your usage. This is how you pay Microsoft for the software that you are using, and so we care very much about getting that usage report. All the other types of Azure Stack deployment can report usage if they want. So if you have a capacity license and you want to report usage, you can. We will not emit any charges, but you'll be able to look at what goes into Azure, and you may want to do it. Also, if you have an ASDK, Azure Stack Development Kit, again, the usage there is free, but if you want to use it to test how Azure Stack is going to work, including what the billing and usage reporting is going to look like, you can report Azure ASDK usage and see it in the Azure billing portal. Now, the way that the hardware partner is going to register your stack is using this PowerShell commandlet. And again, no need for you to make a note of this. It's only interesting from the point of view of saying, here is what the partner will need to be able to make that registration. Essentially, they need an AAD tenant name and a subscription GUID, and then an account associated with that AAD tenant. And that's all they need in order to make that registration. The rest of the information they will have. If you want to read more about this, or if you want to register your own ASDK, going to GitHub, there is a repository called Azure Stack Tools, and there you can find the registration and read about it. Good. We have talked about user workloads already, so again, please be very careful. The admin space, the admin portal in Azure Stack, the default provider subscription, all of those things are for administering the infrastructure. Don't deploy workloads, don't deploy your business applications, don't deploy your customer-facing websites. All of those things are user workloads, and they need to be under user subscriptions. And you don't want to have a discussion with Microsoft about you are in violation of the license agreements. Maybe we will have our lawyers talk to you. I'd rather avoid it. Okay, so this is the overview of how usage is reported. Now we'll drill down into two aspects of this, how it actually works for an EA customer and how it works for a service provider customer. And we'll start with the EA customers, and let me introduce Aparna, who will walk you through that.
Thanks, Alfredo. So the next section is going to focus on how do we report usage for EA customers. Just a quick show of hands. How many people here are already using Azure through EA or plan to use Azure or Azure Stack through EA? OK. Quite a few of them. OK, cool. So one of the there are a couple of prerequisites that you need to meet in order to start using your Azure Stack through your EA channel. And the prerequisites is very similar to what you do with Azure, which is, first one, you need to have an enterprise enrollment agreement, which needs to have Azure purchase enabled. And then the second one is you need to have an associated EA Azure subscription. This is very similar to what you do with EA. And like Alfredo mentioned, in order for you to start reporting usage to Azure, you need to do the registration step using the same commandlet that Alfredo shared. It's just that you need to provide an Azure subscription ID, which is associated to an EA enrollment at the time of registration. That step will be done by your hardware partners, but just calling that out. And basically what this registration does is both enables usage reporting as well as marketplace syndication. And once usage reporting is enabled, basically you should be able to see the usage through the same billing portals that you would see usage for Azure EA from. So it's the same ea.azure.com, and it's the same APIs that you would use to pull Azure usage.
Should I switch to this?
Oh, yeah. Now we can switch to the next screen. Perfect. We have a quick demo for you of the ea.azure.com portal, which is the EA portal. And so basically, when you log in, you see the Reports tab, which has most of the usage information. And as you can see, under the Azure Service section, you can see the Azure Stack usage information show up. You'll notice that most of this is $0 because it's just a test subscription and we're just testing the data. But typically, if you have both Azure as well as Azure Stack usage, it would show up in the same section. So that this just tells you that, hey, you're going to have one invoice which has both Azure as well as Azure Stack. And we'll get into the reporting data to see how you can differentiate between Azure Stack and Azure. So if you have seen this portal before, you know where to go to get the reporting data. So under the download usage, you have two ways to get reporting data. One is a monthly report download, which gives you usage data per month. Or if you want to do advanced reporting, you can just specify the time frame and select the accounts and download it. So I already have a downloaded version, so I'm just going to use that for this demo. All right, so if you click on the downloaded CSV, this is how it looks like. First glance, it looks exactly like Azure, which is by design. There are a couple of fields that we want to call out, which is the meter region. So like Alfredo already mentioned, meter region for Azure Stack usage will be tagged as Azure Stack. And this is the easiest way for you to differentiate between what's Azure Stack usage versus what's Azure usage. Azure usage would actually have the data center location there. Then the other field that we should talk about is the additional info field, which is right here. And as you may notice, you see that for Azure Stack usage, you're seeing the Azure Stack meter ID and the Azure Stack subscription ID. These are both the local meter ID and the local subscription ID that Alfredo was just talking about. So if you are trying to compare the usage between what Azure Stack local APIs are emitting versus what you see on the commerce side, these two things will let you do one-to-one mapping. But bear in mind that not all meters are going to flow to the EA portal, because there are only chargeable meters that show up here.
May I interject one
Sure.
thing? This is very interesting if you have different departments using the Azure Stack, and those different departments will most likely be using different local subscriptions on Azure Stack. you can turn to the information that Aparna just showed and attribute the cost of using the Azure Stack to the different departments that have used it.
Yeah.
It all flows into one Azure subscription, so you pay for everything in one place, but you have the information internally to allocate the cost.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah, so basically the subscription ID would be different for the different subscriptions that you would see on the Azure Stack side. Perfect. With that, I think I'll switch over to the deck again. And we are done with this demo. So I'll hand it over back to Alfredo to talk about CSP usage reporting.
Okay. Thank you. So how does it work? How does this work for service providers? As I've mentioned, service providers are going to license Azure Stack through the CSP program. So you need to have a CSP agreement with Microsoft. And then things are going to be actually very similar to how they work in the resale of Azure services. Show of hand, how many of you are service providers here? Oh, okay, good number. How many of you are enterprises who think they might get Azure Stack services through a service provider? Anybody? At least one. Okay, good. Okay, well, so right now we have a buyer's market, it seems. It's like this guy is going to buy all of your other services. Okay, so let me describe the business aspect of what a CSP will have in reselling Azure Stack. And actually, there are two different scenarios. If you are familiar with the CSP program, you know that there is a direct CSP and an indirect or two-tier CSP. So let's start with the one-tier direct CSP. So the business picture is, of course, that there is the direct CSP. The direct CSP owns and operates the Azure Stack. And the direct CSP has a number of customers who consume services on Azure Stack. How is this going to be implemented? It's going to be implemented in this way. So the direct CSP, as the operator of Azure Stack, needs to register Azure Stack. We've said that is the first thing that needs to happen before you start using Azure Stack. So you need a subscription for that. You need a CSP subscription for that. There is a problem there, right? The CSP agreement says that you cannot use CSP subscriptions for internal usage. We've gone and we've secured an exception to that agreement. So as a CSP, you can go and create a dummy tenant, essentially, for yourself, and one or more CSP subscriptions under it, for the purpose of registering Azure Stack. So that exception is now in the CSP documentation, and you are allowed to do what we are describing here. So you use the CSP tenant and the subscription associated with it, this dummy tenant, to register your Azure Stack. And then your new customers come to you, or existing customers come to you. Through Partner Center, you create AAD tenants if needed for them, and CSP Azure subscriptions for them if needed. And then you add those tenant subscription pairs to the registration. Essentially, you will, as you bring on new customers, as you onboard them to Azure Stack, you will keep updating your registration for the new customers that come on, and then the usage report will flow to Azure in the same way as it would for an enterprise customer. But since these are CSP subscriptions that you are using, all of the normal CSP things apply. That is, the end customer does not see their usage in the Azure portal. You, the service provider, are billed for that usage and then can decide how to bill the customer and how much. Now, I would like to point out a thing which is interesting from a cost management point of view. The end customer, in using Azure Stack, will again create local subscriptions in the normal way. So each of these customers that you onboard to Azure Stack we'll probably end up creating multiple local subscriptions. And the local subscriptions are mapped to one CSP subscription per tenant. The information is passed through to commerce in the same way that Aparna has shown to you for the enterprise. So when you get your reconciliation files, you will see that, that the local subscriptions are going to be in the additional info fields. So let me show you very quickly how this works in Partner Center. And actually, this is not real Partner Center. I've taken a number of screenshots because the network has the bad habit of abandoning us at the worst of times when we do these demos. So if you are a service provider, you've been into Partner Centers, this is what it looks like. The next thing that you do is you go into your customer list. And I would like to show you what I have done here to set up for Azure Stack registration. I have created a tenant, which is this Microsoft Azure Stack CSP test. That is essentially the dummy tenant that I have created especially for myself. You can see that this is the information about, if I go into that tenant in Partner Center, it shows to me like any other customer that this CSP has, but this is the internal dummy one. Now, as you know, from Partner Center, then this is the company info. If you can read the microscopic font on the screen, you'll see that it is Microsoft again. So you know that from Partner Center, then you can go to the Azure Management Portal. So from here, we click through to the Azure Management Portal. At this point, and again, this is going to be very hard to read, but if you look up in this corner of the screen, in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see that we are now logged in as the service provider managing this dummy tenant account. As we manage the dummy tenant account, we see the CSP subscription here at the bottom associated with the account. And what I would like to show you is if you click into the resource providers associated with that subscription, you see that the Azure Stack resource provider is on the list and the subscription has been registered with it, and that means that we are ready to charge usage to this subscription. There are two ways that service providers can view charges for the usage that their customers do. One of them is the Partner Center APIs, and Azure Stack usage flows through the Partner Center APIs. So if you're used to querying them, you can query them for the Azure Stack meters as well and see your usage. And And the other way that you can see it is through a reconciliation file, which you download here from the portal. It actually looks very similar to the one that Aparna has shown you for the enterprise. But instead of representing one customer with one subscription, it represents multiple customers with multiple subscriptions and potentially with reseller partners involved. So there are additional columns to track that. But then the Azure Stack information that is passed along is exactly the same. What's the meter, what's the quantity used, what's the price, and the additional info that represents the local information. Okay. So we've talked about the direct CSP scenario. Let's talk about the indirect or two-tier CSP scenario. What happens here is, thank you very much. What happens in the indirect CSP scenario is that there is a reseller involved, right? So the indirect CSP partner is going to own and operate Azure Stack. And then resellers maybe system integrators, maybe consultants, other people with good technical skills and good selling skills will go and sign up customers. So indirect partner, reseller, and customer is the structure here. Actually, what you set up in Azure Stack for this situation is very similar to what you did in the direct scenario. The only thing that is different, as those of you who are indirect CSPs know, is when the indirect CSP creates a new customer in Partner Center, they declare as an attribute of that customer which reseller the customer is associated with. And then that information becomes an attribute of the subscription. When you view the usage report for that customer, the partner ID of the reseller is also reported. And that's really the only difference that exists between the two scenarios from the point of view of how you interact with Partner Center and how you interact with Azure Stack. OK, so now the next topic that we want to cover is taking this usage information and integrating it with billing and cost solutions. Do you want to go from here?
Yeah. All right. OK, so basically what this section covers is it talks about the local APIs in detail so that you know exactly what data you're going to get out of that. And when do you use the local APIs versus when do you use the commerce APIs. So this is the same usage pipeline diagram that Alfredo shared in the first couple of slides. And this is just a refresher to let you guys know that there are two types of APIs that you can call. One is the local usage APIs that you see at the bottom, which is directly pulling usage data from the stack, versus you could also get usage data from the Azure Commerce Systems, which is the existing way you would get Azure usage data from. There are a few key differences between usage data from both these systems, which is basically everything that the usage gateway transforms. So the subscription IDs are local, and the meter IDs are local in case of the local usage APIs, versus in case of Azure, you're going to get the Azure meter ID and the Azure subscription ID. So the next couple of slides focuses a little bit on what you're going to get from the local usage API, which is something new that we have for Stack. So this is basically the sample call of the local usage API. You're basically calling the subscriber usage aggregates API. And what that gives you as an admin is the usage for all of your tenants. So the basic parameters is passing the start date and the reported end date. And both of those are mandatory. But there are a few other parameters that you can pass if you want to filter the data or change the granularity of the data. And below, I also have like a snapshot of the response. And the key fields that you'll see is under the properties object, which is the subscription ID. And since this is the local API, you're going to get the local subscription ID. Then you're going to get the usage start and end time. Instance data gives you basically the resource URI. That's your name of the VM or name of the storage account. And then you also get the quantity and the meter ID. And meter ID here is the local meter ID. And we have a couple of PowerShell scripts that you can run. The top one is probably the most important. And you can actually already access this through GitHub. And what this PowerShell API does is, PowerShell script does is it calls the local usage APIs and basically goes through all the pages and creates a CSV. And I have a snapshot of the CSV right there. As you can see, it basically gives you the meter ID. What we have introduced is like the meter name so that you don't have to figure that out yourself. And then it gives you the pretty much the same output that your API response is going to give you. And at the bottom, we also have the PowerShell commandlet that you would use. This is very similar to what you would use in Azure, which is the get usage aggregates. But if you use this, you're only looking at usage data for a particular subscription at a time. So if you really want to use this, you can definitely use it. And it works exactly like it would work for Azure. So no changes there. And there are like a couple of issues with using this one. If you have questions on that, just stop by after the session, and we can talk more about it. All right, and this slide basically talks about when do I use what. So on the left-hand side, you can see the characteristics of the Azure usage APIs. like Alfredo already mentioned, there's going to be more usage meters that the local usage APIs are going to emit, because we only share the chargeable meters with the commerce team. So that's one of the basic differences. So if you want to look at meters that are not charged, you would want to use the Azure Stack usage APIs. There's not really a time advantage, because our usage aggregation works every 24 hours. So you will have to wait for 24 hours, even if you're pulling usage data from the stack. And if you have multiple stacks, you need to pull data from multiple endpoints, because all the endpoints are going to be different. And finally, usage data on your stack is only retained for 180 days. So if you want to pull data that is before 180 days, you have to use the commerce APIs.
So I like to tell people what they have to do. It is a defect that I have. And in this case, my advice would be, if you want Azure Stack usage data, start with what you get from Azure Commerce. Don't go to the local APIs unless you find out that you really have to. And really have to would mean that you need one of the usage meters that are not processed by Commerce, one of the things that Microsoft does not charge for. The reason for going straight to the Azure Commerce output is that probably you want to look at it anyway for your Azure usage. And most likely, a lot of organizations are already set up to process that usage and either do billing with it if they are service providers, do internal billing if you are enterprises. So stay with what is already done for you, process a few more new meters through it, and be done it that way, unless you really have a specific requirement that requires the local APIs.
Yep. All right, with that, we are towards the end of the session. And these are like certain resources that you can look at once you have access to the deck. And we were referencing some of these things in our presentation today.
Yeah, we've talked about GitHub. We have talked about getting information from the Partner Center APIs. So there are links to all of those things if you download the slides. We have a couple of minutes for questions. So if you have questions, I would like to ask that you please use the microphones. So when people watch the recording, they will be able to hear you. Or you can ask us privately at the end if you prefer. Yes.
Sure. As a CSP, so if an enterprise customer comes to me and wants to use our Azure Stack but use their public Azure credits,
yep.
How does that work?
That is allowed with one condition. The Azure Stack needs to be dedicated to that customer. If the Azure Stack is dedicated to that customer, then they can use their EA monetary commitment to pay for the Azure Stack software. You would register the Azure Stack in the name, so using a tenant ID associated with that customer and using their subscription ID from Azure, and then it would be allowed for you to manage the stack on behalf of the customer.
But no multi-tenant?
Sorry?
No multi-tenant?
If the Azure Stack is shared, then you are required to license it through CSP. That is a general CSP versus dedicated hosting kind of rule. It's actually not an Azure Stack specific thing. Good. Thank you very much for staying until the end.
Thank you.